Existence is beyond the power of words to define. Terms may be used, but none of them are absolute. In the beginning of heaven and earth, there were no words. Words came out of the womb of matter. And whether a man dispassionately sees to the core of life, or passionately sees the surface, the core and the surface are essentially the same. Words making them seem different, only to express appearance. If name be needed, wonder names them both. From wonder into wonder, existence opens. Good evening, and welcome back to Aware Words. This time I'm back in my normal chair, not being interviewed. I'm quite happy to be here. Tonight I'm interviewing and talking with some guests from the Freedom Party of Ontario. And as in the words of Lao Tzu, the way of life, it's very hard to define political parties. Often it's almost impossible because there seems to be so much verbiage going out these days that it's difficult to nail one thing down. So tonight I thought we would have an opportunity to find out just what freedom is all about. My guests tonight are Robert Metz, the president of the Ontario Freedom Party, and Kathleen Yurcich, excuse me. And we'll be talking about what freedom means. Good evening.
Yeah. Hi.
Okay, Robert. I'm going to give you a little bit of...
Ontario these days, campaign workers hammering election signs into lawns. But this election sign isn't quite as familiar. It's for the Freedom Party of Ontario, and one of its founding members is Marc Emery, well known for his opposition to London taxpayers supporting the 1991 Pan Am Games. He's the party's campaign director and says every issue in this election, whether it be jobs or censorship, ultimately involves the citizens' freedom of choice. Freedoms governments have consistently taken away.
We believe that the purpose of government should be to protect your freedom of choice and not to restrict it. And we believe that the three parties that are in government today that are out looking for votes are parties that are basically going to increase your taxes, increase our debt, and further restrict the options and opportunities and choices you have available to you.
Emery formed the party just over a year ago with Robert Metz, who's running in London South and also party president. Both were previously associated with the Libertarian Party and were dissatisfied with its lack of commitment between elections. They say this party will be around after May 2nd, even if it loses. And they say they have no doubt they will.
For us, the election certainly isn't a viable thing to look at in terms of winning votes, and none of the candidates in our campaign expect to get more than 100 or 200 votes.
Michelle McComb is the party's candidate in London Centre, and she's spending most of her evenings dropping off pamphlets door to door. She's worried women are becoming more dependent on government because of their policies. The Freedom Party's only other candidate in this election is Robert Smink in London North. The small businessman feels increased government bureaucracy is killing his chances at getting ahead. At a recent all-candidates meeting, he said he's against people being forced to join a union.
We believe that having the right to associate also means having the right not to associate. We help the downtown London Eaton's employees fight against forced association and compulsory union dues.
The decision by some Eaton's employees not to join a union is seen as a victory to the party. On other issues, the party is against censorship, government job creation schemes, and government-subsidized health care. It feels women who want abortion should be allowed to have them, but pay for them out of their own pocket. And the party says governments threaten our economic survival by taxing us excessively and by directly causing soaring inflation. The Freedom Party contends the purpose of government is to protect your freedom of choice, not restrict it. Just how many people agree enough to give them their vote on May 2nd is still to be seen.
Question to both of you. What exactly does the Freedom Party stand for, and why did you form it?
Well, I guess I'm the best person to answer that initially. Freedom Party stands for individual freedom and individual responsibility. Definitely not license. I think one of the most critical vacuum that is created in today's political world is an understanding of what freedom is, and that freedom is not a license to do as one pleases, but is more or less the right to make one's choices for oneself in determining his own lifestyle, his own goals, and his economic arrangements. And this is a rather all-encompassing philosophy that we're here to promote. I'm here to sell freedom, and I want to prove to people that freedom works.
Okay, Kathleen, can I have your definition?
Well, Freedom Party stands for less government. It stands for individual rights and property rights. And that was one of the main things that attracted me to forming this party, only because it attaches, those premises attaches it to one's self-esteem. And I think that's why I helped found that.
Okay, when I mention Freedom Party to people, almost the first question I get asked is, are they right or left?
Of course.
No, okay, obviously, I mean, this is programmed into people. No, okay, can you answer that?
Well, we don't regard ourselves either as right or left, and not on the middle of the road in between either. We don't see ourselves on the traditional political spectrum, because to us, the right and left of a road, we're talking about a road that's leading away from freedom, and we're on a road that's leading towards freedom. Traditionally, we see left-wing philosophies as restricting economic choice, rights we have as individuals to make our own economic arrangements. Traditionally, we see right-wing philosophies as restricting personal choices, choices relating to the self, to things like censorship, to certain health issues. And we believe that as long as the individual is willing and able to take the responsibility for himself, it's his right to make these decisions for himself.
Would your philosophy be akin to Thoreau's, Whitman's, Tolstoy, the early writers of individual freedom?
No, I think there's definitely there is a difference there. When we talk about freedom, we refer to freedom of choice, where what that means is one shouldn't really be restricted in their private life, how they think, how they want to spend their money, what they want to do with their lives. One should have that freedom to choose your lifestyle and choose your values according to your own morality. Now, laws of the country, criminal and otherwise, are already there to protect each other from wrongdoing, and for the government to increase restrictions on those things that are important to us, which is freedom of choice. That's when it becomes a conflict.
I think, too, we have to keep in mind that much of what's been described as freedom throughout history has been not necessarily political freedom, but freedom from the necessity of having to earn one's way. And we have to be careful.
Sorry, can you run that one through me again? The freedom to...
That often the political freedom, the freedom that you have to make choices and take responsibility for yourself, is confused with the freedom to be able to make choices without taking that responsibility, to put it another way, to place that responsibility on the shoulders of somebody else. And as a political philosophy, it's a dead-end street. Sure, it can work for a while. It's like, you know, economically, we're looking today at government deficits that have never been as high in the history of the Western world. We're looking at a situation where we've taken our governments, seeing the great system we had as a consequence of a great degree of freedom and free enterprise in both this country and to the country to our south, and taken the bounty from that, the reward we got from that, and thinking that we can redistribute it by giving to some people at the expense of others in social distribution programs that exist in many ways and don't just go to help the poor and disadvantaged as many people assume.
I get the impression, excuse me a moment, remember this is a phone-in show. If you would like to call in, express an opinion or have some comments about this, please call in. It's 672-4821. Thank you. Your last remark there, Robert, are you saying that the Freedom Party is against social services?
Oh, absolutely not.
You're not?
No.
No, but it might sound to somebody that you didn't, everybody should be responsible for themselves. This is...
Primarily, that is
Yeah.
our social responsibility. If I can't be responsible for myself, then the consequence of that is that someone else is either going to have to be responsible for me, or I'm going to go by the wayside one way or the other. Now, the issue in our society is not so much, see, we have to separate what we view as an ideal society, what would create a progressive society that creates the wealth we need to all survive, and what to do about helping the poor or helping the people who cannot help themselves. These are two entirely separate issues. And the problem is we tend to confuse them, put them together as one, and end up creating a complete government system that, in order to help the poor, often handicaps other people unnecessarily. Many of the restrictions we have in labor laws, in some of the ways that we deal with actually spending of our money, where it goes, people really don't have a choice in those matters. And for us, the ideal society would be one in which the bulk of that type of work could be taken up by private organizations, by voluntary groups, and where the government would be regarded as the last source of aid for individuals rather than as the first and as a matter of right. I mean, we're at the bottom line here. Let's face it. I mean, there's only so much money the taxpayer has. There's only so far in debt governments can go. And it just seems that most of our politicians, certainly of the traditional parties, aren't even paying attention to the economic signs, the social signs that show that the road they're heading in is a dead-end one. And we've got to change direction. That's what politics is all about.
Okay.
Choosing direction.
I'll pick one of those that you just said and ask you, Kathleen. Social signs. How do you see social signs as describing the failure of government? Big government, yeah, it is big government, isn't it?
First of all, what do you mean by social signs?
Well, Robert said there were significant social signs, basically, that the system is failing.
Oh, like sociologically?
Yes.
And connected with economics and that sort of thing. Yeah. It fails only because inherently people are not looking after themselves. It's sort of a collective, massive collective of people in the country relying on their neighbors to support them. And you can't accept that. I mean, I can't accept that, for one thing. And I think that again, it brings up conflict. There are people out there in society who have worked, have struggled to make a good life for themselves, and all that. I mean, they watch their property and which means their money, their dwindling to nothing, and with increased taxes and inflation, and it just seems very irrational that one should strive for your own life and looking after those things that you value, but at the same time you're dishing out for other people's so-called values as well, because they want to live too, but at whose expense? You know, and this is where I draw the line, and why I support Freedom Party, because it is questioning those things, and it is providing a vehicle whereby one should choose their own life and take responsibility for that on their own, without relying heavily on your neighbor.
Okay, if you cannot rely on your neighbor, we've talked about this a lot on this show. If we can't rely on the community to help, then we have to turn, theoretically, to the government. And the government, in turn, makes more legislation, more laws, bylaws, or whatever. And as you say, people get wrapped up in red tape and restrictions on their own lifestyles. But how could you see this change? I mean, this is a massive undertaking, is it not?
Well, first of all, let's redirect that question a little bit. I don't think we're dealing with the issue quite in perspective. It's not that society isn't there to provide aid to people who may need it, etc., etc. Certainly social agencies are required. We have to look at what governments are doing, what they're telling us they're doing versus what they're doing. And I think one of the most critical things that we have to clear up today in our social services is this concept of universality. That here we are, we put all these social services into place. under the guise of helping the poor, the disadvantaged, the people at the bottom of our society, and yet many of the programs that are there in place for them are universally accessible to rich and poor alike, to people on the poor end of the scale, on the rich end of the scale, everywhere in between. Everyone on the OHIP system can go to a doctor essentially free of charge. They've even banned extra billing. Was this put in place to help the poor? Is anybody going to be able to convince me of that? I don't really think so. And I think the sad admission of a program like this is if you really did put some serious government programs into place that were just for the poor, I don't know if you get the political support necessary to put them into place. So what politicians have to offer us is a universal program so that we think we're getting something out of the deal, because nobody really, you know, especially through government, everybody wants to get even with the system because they know somewhere down the line they're paying more than what they're getting out of it. And unfortunately, that's what we see. We see a preponderance of social programs, everything from our education system, our health system, our welfare system. Everybody's getting a piece of the pie. And I think that countries' histories of the past have proven that that just doesn't work. It's a short-term ticket to a disaster.
Oh, I think Britain's a good example of that.
But it's not a matter of choice. That's really when you get down to this point in our time. We are at a point where we can sit and discuss and say, well, what are we going to do? What new government program are we going to, make up for the next problem that happens to come along? There are only so many resources to go around, and only so much wealth that the economy can create, and we have to look at that in realistic terms.
So you're really saying that we're over-governed or over-regulated?
In many respects, yes.
Particularly in social
social areas,
yeah.
yes. Economically, yes.
How could it be changed? Through the private sector?
Now, which problem are you addressing, though?
The general services like education, welfare,
each problem demands a, quote, different program or different approach. For example, if you're talking about the subject of education, we advocate the directing of one's education tax to the school of their choice. Certainly, our education system requires, everybody's always talking about a great deal of funding, but regrettably, most of the funding we see going into our education system, once again, doesn't quite hit the mark. We see money going into salaries, into capital outlay, and with no real guarantee or promise of a specific result. And that's not the way to go. I think you've got to give parents and older students, etc., the right to direct their education taxes to the school of their choice. That's where you first take the first step to get the government's hands out of directly running schools. You still haven't removed the opportunity for everyone to go.
Okay, I agree with you here. For example, I'm qualified to teach in Ontario at university level and community college. I cannot teach at high school. I don't have an Ontario teacher certificate.
There you go. It's like a labor monopoly is what it is.
It's called ridiculous. So really we're getting back to your main theme is freedom of choice. And this I like. But can you explain a little more, Kathleen, how this would affect us if, hypothetically, the Freedom Party gained a lot more clout than it has right now?
Okay, let's look at something more specific here. Like daycare centers, okay. Daycare is a major issue with a lot of single parents and working women and people who are professionals and so on. Now, right now there's a lot of pressure with women's groups. Like they seem to be pushing a lot of this issue with daycare into the government, wanting more and more programs, wanting taxpayers to support daycare, for example. Now, again, if there were less government, okay, that simply means that this is a problem that is only applies to those people who have those specific needs, like daycare. Well, look, why not set up an association for daycare in your local community? Be creative about it. Everybody whose self-interest is involved here, like single parents or professionals working, okay, everyone in your community set up associations for daycare. All chip in as little as possible to see how you can solve this problem. But it's their own problem. I'm saying is that
but
it's not.
The opposite side of that is that problem should present that community with an opportunity.
It's an opportunity.
But instead of looking at it as an opportunity, they look to the government for assistance.
Yeah.
Well, that's the automatic thing.
And it's so automatic.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
now, I just want to butt in here and remind listeners, both on 6X and on this channel, it's a phone-in call. If you have comments and opinions, please call in at 672-4821. We'll welcome them. You made a good point there. Why do communities run away and say, oh, let's go to the provincial or go to the federal government, rather than looking around their own block, or 2 blocks or 3 blocks, whatever, and say, hey, let's all chip in $10
you see,
or something.
Remember earlier,
get it together.
Kris, when I mentioned about how, what it seems to be today is that everyone, the masses, seem to be relying on their neighbors for support through government force, okay? But what I'm saying is that I'm not saying we should run away from community. I think the community is a strength. It is an opportunity to solve problems. But only in your own, you can only do that locally and with some creative initiative. And any problem that comes up can be solved, but without forcing other people to contribute to that. And that's really what is, I think, our main concern, is not forcing other individuals, to contribute to something that they prefer not to.
Can I ask you if what you're talking about is the same as the forced integration in the United States, bus schooling, which has been, as far as I'm concerned, a disaster?
Well, philosophically, it certainly is.
Yeah.
I mean, here you're dealing essentially with an issue of forced association, where some people are being forced to finance a benefit for someone else. Like anything in life, I think having children is an individual responsibility. It's an individual choice. We fought for it for so long. Women there's no abortion law in Canada now. Certainly with these choices must come some level of responsibility. I think it's time for people to accept it. But they seem to want the choice, and then they want another free choice attached to it, paid for by the government, and always forgetting the government is, in the end, them. You really don't get ahead in the long run. It just is that short-term ticket to a benefit that people seem to still go for politically. Yeah. I honestly believe that for quite a while yet to come, for a person to be elected in this country or any basic democratic country for a while, if he's given them benefits, even if it's at their expense, that's what's going to get them in.
Okay.
People want to see that.
I have a call for you. Good evening, Paul. You're on.
Yeah, you were talking about education a while ago. Like now the Roman Catholic education is now publicly funded. It's a lobby group that we're looking for special favors from the government. And it seems like it's just buying votes to me, but like, what's next? Are we going to have other religious groups bringing their preference of education in under the public umbrella? It mushrooms, it skyrockets, all this expenditure. And we'd be better off with private schools, not having to pay tax, so we can afford to send our children to private schools, schools of our own choice. If it was a competitive educational system, there would be no question about getting the education you chose to your child. Doing it the government way just seems absurd.
Well, certainly your point is well taken. In fact, we addressed the Shapiro Commission on Private Education, and I think that was back in 1985. And I guess ours was the only brief that was an exception to the rule, but for the most part, many of the private schools and other associations in the province, educational associations, we're all in favor of having tax dollars directed towards them, but tax dollars coming from public coffers, not from the choice of the individual taxpayer deciding where his money will go. And it's curious that the one thing that they all want to avoid is that terrible word, competition. As long as the government's there, I mean, now the Catholic schools have got it, and every other small interest school, regardless of religion or non-religion or whatever, thinks that somehow morally they are entitled to these education tax dollars. And let's face it, you already see the struggle existing between the separate and the public school system just over that small change, which really it was.
It seems that big government tries to lower everything to its lowest possible common denominator and then sort of sell it.
That's right.
En masse, to the masses, if you like. I hate using terms like the masses, but that's what seems to happen. Does that answer your question, caller?
Well, it doesn't answer it.
No, but...
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Good night. We'll be going to a station break very briefly, and when we come back, I'll have two more members of the Freedom Party on the panel, if I can call it that. It'll be Marc Emery from City Lights Bookstores, and Murray Hopper, who is an interesting gentleman. I'm sure you'll enjoy it. Thank you.
Marc Emery of the Freedom Party held a brief news conference on his plans to collect garbage for lower-income people and senior citizens. He expects to do 3 blocks a day starting Tuesday. Some strikers then confronted him on the issue.
I say we don't take it over to your house, right. City.
Well, why don't you tell us what streets where you're going to pick it up, and we'll take the garbage over there.
In the phone book, if that's the kind of attitude you have to dealing with the problems of certain people who won't be able to cope, then I say bring it to my house, dump it on my front lawn, if that's what's going to make you guys feel better. But I'm telling you, that's not going to be very sympathetic to the people of London. I don't think they're going to appreciate a gesture of that kind.
The garbage pickup was in a very small area of the city on Pine Lawn and East Streets, south of Hamilton Road. The Freedom Party was collecting garbage from residents who were left notices yesterday. Not everyone set their trash on the boulevard, but when the truck arrived, the garbage appeared. For organizer Marc Emery, it was a constructive form of political statement.
This is what we thought it was a constructive protest. It's a way of saying, listen, we don't feel that we should be blackmailed either by the city or by the union or by anybody about essential services. And yet rather than, take petitions or protest or picket or something like that, we thought what more constructive way of going about it than picking up people's garbage and showing that they don't have to say, oh, we surrender, we're going to let our city look terrible, let it become unsafe and unhealthy, so we're going to do our bit to at least keep this neighborhood as clean as possible.
The system is not as sophisticated as the city's, and you can't read a schedule to see when the pickup will be. People seemed satisfied that the garbage was gone, although a few refused to cooperate because they support the striking outside city workers. The service costs Emery and the Freedom Party $60 for the truck each day and $100 to empty a full truck at a landfill site outside the city. But Emery says the cost is worth it in order to make a point.
He called every week. Good evening. We're back again, and this time I'm with Marc Emery and Murray Hopper, and we have a call right away. Good evening. You're on.
Hello?
Hello. Go ahead.
Okay. Now there was a piece of legislation passed called Bill C-72. I'm not quite familiar with it. It's something to do with the It's something to do with the bilingual laws in Ontario. I was wondering, is the Freedom Party for it or against it?
Well, Chris, I can assure you that Freedom Party is against any kind of imposition by the government of language on us. And what that bill does is it entrenches French language, not rights. See, they're not rights fine, but it's forcing civil servants and various sectors of the government to provide French language services where there really is no demand, which to me is just part of the government control of our use of language and communication. So we, of course, were very much opposed to that and made it known, as we have always been opposed to any official bilingualism. It's proper for the government to provide services in French and English where there is a demand, but it is wrong to compel areas where there is no legitimate demand to adopt these in government services. It tends to allow French Canadians better access to jobs. It tends to allow people with better control over 2 languages and actual talent to rise into positions in civil service.
Now, do you know how much funding will be spent? Is it a provincial bill or is it a federal bill? Do you know? I don't know.
It was a federal bill, and it will require great amounts of money. But more than anything, what it does is entrenches the government's control with penalties to us if these laws aren't obeyed. And, of course, Freedom Party is opposed to all forms of censorship, and this actually is one. When the government compels us to respond in a certain language or in a certain measurement, like metric over imperial, this is a form of censorship. The government is controlling culture in our society, and individuals should control culture.
Thank you very much. I'm also opposed to Bill C-72.
Thank you for your call.
Okay.
We'll be going into censorship and pornography very shortly, but first of all, I'd like to ask Murray Hopper how you got involved in the Freedom Party, sir.
Well, that's a long story.
Well, try and edit it.
Okay. In 1942, I joined the CCF. 20 years later, I made the switch to the NDP.
Yeah.
And about 20 years after that, I became a free market man. Now, that happened in a curious way. I became a landlord in 1975. But by 1981, I pretty well had it with that occupation. And as it happened, I had renewed my membership at the NDP in January of that year. But by March, I had my figures for the year, and I had a lot of red ink. And just about that time, it was either Bob Ray or perhaps Broadbent mentioned something about greedy landlords. And I felt a stab of irritation.
Yep.
And I went back and read Ayn Rand's Atlas Shrugged again. I hadn't been able to deal with it the first time. And I was instantly converted to a free market position. And then shortly after that, I met Mark and Bob, and the rest is history.
Okay. We have a call for you guys. Good evening. You're on. Hello. Jack, you're on. Hello.
Hello.
Jack, you're on.
Yes.
Go ahead.
Hello.
Hello.
Yes, who am I speaking with?
Well, right now with Chris. Would you like to speak to Mark or to Murray?
Oh, to either one. Just in general, I'd like to make a statement and also point out a couple of things.
Go ahead.
Hello.
Go ahead.
Yes.
Must be the bell.
I'd like to make the statement that the Freedom Party apparently, and I've been listening to what they're saying, does not seem to have a good sense of direction nor a solution to any of the problems. In referring to the daycare program, I feel that there are a number of things that they are missing, and well, they have shown no real solution because, first of all, if you I lost track of what I was going to say here.
Look, sir, I don't think it's a question of them coming up with instant solutions. The fact is that they are running and being a viable, an alternative party. You cannot solve things until you have power.
Well, there's certainly a solution on daycare, and it rests with the individual parent,
to look
not
after
with
their
any
children.
state-run organization. You do not need national standards of daycare. What you need is a nice old lady up in the next block that'll look after your dear ones. And
Well,
that's
what I would-
all that you need.
It's called grassroots.
That's exactly right.
Yes,
What
you're
I
on.
thought about was that the young lady that was on there before stated that you should have local groups run an organization that would take care of the children so that the single parents, etc., could work. Well, first of all, the single parents probably would not get enough wages to be able to afford very much. That, then again, would not get people qualified because they would have to pay them less money, etc., and it just becomes a vicious circle.
Well, I tend to think that the qualifications in terms of pieces of paper or diplomas that you tack on the wall are less important than your ability to deal with children. But anyway, enough on this subject. We have to go on to another subject.
Thank you.
Good night.
If I may add, Chris.
Yeah.
People often accuse Freedom Party of not necessarily having solutions. We have criticisms, we have an analysis of the government, but unfortunately too many people in our society today regard spending other people's money as some kind of solution.
Yeah.
And so if Freedom Party says, well, we'd like to eliminate this pillage of the taxpayer and return the money to the citizens who originally earned it, that isn't regarded as a solution to them. That's regarded as merely doing nothing.
Oh.
And as far as government can do, doing nothing would be a far healthier thing than creating havoc.
I agree with you.
And so that is a solution, because the other three parties are offering the poison as their solution, and we're offering the, I think, basically correcting mechanism of the marketplace and the basic goodwill of society. I think we live in a good society. I don't believe that man is basically bad or evil. And I think that we can rise above our own problems to a greater and better world. And I'm not convinced
that government, which I think takes the most evil elements of society and puts them in a group, is going to make better choices than the mass lot of humanity, which I think is made of much better people, of sterner stuff.
Okay, on this point, I'm going to take another call. Guy, you're on. Guy, you're on.
Hello?
Guy, you're on.
Okay. Hello, Chris. And,
hello, good evening.
I want to ask the Freedom Party is why do they have an image of being right-wing?
Yeah.
Well, I don't think that right and left wing mean much in our terminology. Generally speaking, the right wing, the conservatives are right wing, because they're perceived as favoring the rich, giving the benefits all to the rich, and neglecting the poor. Now the left wing, the NDP, they of course believe in soaking the rich and giving the benefits to the poor. And the liberals, in their infinite balanced way, they want to give the largesse out fairly to anyone who asks for it. Now, we don't have any benefits to confer. We do not believe in government action to solve social problems. So how can we fit into any left-right spectrum? We just can't. We can't be fitted into that context.
I think this stems from that an attitude that somehow Freedom Party executives are heartless.
Where did that come from?
Well, I'm not afraid to confront that, is because if you approach the public with a rigid philosophy, which appears rigid, that somehow being inflexible makes you dictatorial, and of course
something like a fundamentalist or something like that.
That's right, and I've certainly heard that accusation before, and I'm not saying it's unfounded. It's our inability to communicate. Obviously, what I would like to say is that because we have a very principled position that we won't compromise on, that would appear to be dictatorial to some people, which doesn't mean we're not compassionate. Doesn't mean, and in fact, we feel the marketplace is a compassionate, environment for people to solve their problems. And
can be.
Pardon?
Can be.
Yes. Well, no, it is. Whether people solve their problems.
Okay.
Because not everyone wants to solve their own problems. You see, a lot of people enjoy the misery that their misfortune brings. That's a very interesting thing to say. But you remember, it takes a lot of courage to actually confront your problems and to say, I'd like to rise above and solve this. And a lot of people would rather wallow in the mire and involve all their friends and all the government agencies to help them out, because that's a lot easier than saying, I'm going to do this myself and solve my problems. There's a lot of courage required for an individual to live freely. It takes a lot less courage to live under a state that is going to give you everything, and you're a lot less a man for it, too.
We believe that if we put it in a sentence, I believe that everyone is the owner of their life, their time, and the products thereof. Wow. They will naturally develop property because of the exercise of freedom and support of their lives and the implementation of their values.
I like the concept, and I hope you're right.
Hello, can I just make a point, though?
Yep, sure.
That,
I have another call, though, so can we make it brief? Thank you.
Just, you make a lot of good points. It's nice to believe all this, but there's laws for a reason. You say the marketplace is friendly.
Name one.
There are, well...
Give me a reason.
Well, there's a lot of laws to prevent abusive corporations or stuff like that from taking advantage of those poor people and being oppressive. And you seem to take great pride in knocking unions. Now, I'm not always agreeing on what they do, but there's a reason why they exist. It's because of the abuse that people have taken in the past. There's the Winnipeg strike of 1919.
Yeah, but
that was the year I was born, for heaven's sake. He's really reaching back.
Up to now. I mean, that's just history.
Okay, the reverse to that, though, and I'm going to sign off with this, the reverse to that is that Marc gave away books on Christmas Day or Christmas Eve and was charged by the government with breaking the law. Now, one person is trying to be kind. You get both sides. You can get repression anywhere.
His point is well taken. If I might take an opportunity to address this question and deal with a misconception about big corporations. Big corporations didn't get rich by some sort of wand from God or magic. Big corporations or big companies provide mass market goods at a cheap price for the masses.
Well,
you see, it's the masses.
There is a place for them.
Well, but it's the masses. It's the working people. It's the poor, the working people, the masses that make a big corporation. Because only if the masses support a product in such large numbers will any corporation get rich. In the old days, you know, the craftsmen and the guild workers, you know, they only did things for the well-to-do. The poor people had to make do with their own things they hewed out of the ground. I mean, there wasn't that kind of access for poor and middle-income people to get good things. Good things were made exclusively for the rich by craftsmen who were patron. You know, and it's ironic that of all things to liberate poor people, it's been the big corporations. Big corporations have given us everything I see in this studio at a cheap price that anybody can really afford. And when you look at your chairs, your furniture, your televisions, everything that I know are in most homes that are watching tonight was produced for them by a big corporation. And to be spiteful towards them as a working person, I think it's very hypocritical and not fair.
I'm not spiteful. I'm just saying you have to be wary.
Well, we should all be wary. In all our dealings, I think we should be wary.
Personally, I'd much rather have my grandmother's rocking chair, you know, which will last for another 100 years, as opposed to a plastic thing that will last 2, and then I'll trade it in. However, this is neither here nor there. Thank you for your call.
Okay.
Good night. You're on, Marion. Hello?
Hello?
Hello, you're on.
Yes, I'm enjoying the show.
Good.
And the Freedom Party had my vote.
Oh!
I would like to ask a question to Murray Hopper. Would not free trade wipe out the baby bonus, unemployment insurance, and change our old age pensions?
Well, apparently not, if we're to believe what we're told, and I believe that that is the case, that these are not on the table.
But they should be.
They should be. They should be. They certainly should be. Because they're, without doubt, they're a kind of hidden subsidy. And for example, family allowances, I don't know, certainly the United States don't have those. I would think most people, if it came right down to it, they could get along without family allowances, the great majority of people.
Well,
now, yes.
What's even more ironic is that don't every family who receives a family allowance check realize they probably paid twice that much in taxes to get it? I mean, bureaucrats process those checks. The mail delivers them. The bureaucracy involved to get $30 per child, as it might be, or whatever the family allowance check might be, requires twice as much being put in, and it's the same middle class. And the middle class are the people that are always getting exploited for any of these programs. And they're the people that appear to be receiving a benefit, but they're paying twice as much.
I wonder if the average man ever sat down and actually figured out how much he gets in family benefits and other handouts
and how much he pays in taxes.
And how much he pays in taxes.
And then plus his debt.
And then deducts the friction costs, you know, of the provision.
Does that help, Marion?
Yes, thank you very much.
Thank you for your call. Okay, one thing that I would like to get into tonight, and that is the Freedom Party is anti-censorship. And I believe you did quite a campaign on the various the bill C-54, which would have taken books out of libraries and told us what we can watch and what we can listen to, etc. Could you tell me a little bit about this, and then I'd like to run a clip of what you've been doing about it.
Mark knows more about the actual campaign, but I did have one point I wanted to make. Most people who are opposed to censorship, they always start out by saying, I'm in favor of free speech, but, and then they continue to completely disqualify themselves. They always have an exception. What they don't understand, that it's these very people who are so rotten and raunchy and showing all these dirty pictures and using this filthy language, it's these very people that need the protection of that right. Now, none of us here is going to embarrass anyone in public by coming out with vulgar language or doing obscene. I'm not going to drop my drawers or anything like that. But these people always do that. They can't understand that the right has to extend to the most obnoxious among us.
Okay, with that, I'm going to go to a clip of some of the work you did for anti-censorship.
But feminists and Christian people who are using this pornography hysteria are using this child porn scare to cover the fact they are trying to ban, censor, and prohibit materials that basically they're just personally and politically opposed to. And what does it boil down to? They're indeed against sex and the enjoyment of representations of sex.
Margaret McGee of the National Council of Women praised Mark McGuigan's proposed law reforms. On the topic of prostitution, she said it is a crime without a victim.
We are asking that there be no legal prohibition relating to soliciting except in the case of adult soliciting from minors, and that there be increased penalties for procuring and living wholly or in part on the avails of prostitution of another person.
Robert Metz of the London Freedom Party told the committee everyone has the right to degrade themselves. He sees censorship as the use of force.
We have a criminal code whose obscenity provisions literally leave anyone charged under them without a legal leg to stand on. There's no possible objective defense in a court of subjectivity, where the opinion of a judge is deemed absolute, and even where that opinion can be overturned at a later date.
Jean Westney isn't buying any of it. Not the part about art or beauty or good, clean fun. When she looks at a Sunshine Girl, she sees pornography.
We have to realize that we do live in a pornographic society, and we are surrounded by images that are pornographic. So our entire image as women is to market ourselves so that we will be attractive to men.
And you consider that pornographic?
Yes, we do.
It's a chicken and the egg syndrome. Did the person rape because they had all this pornography? Or because he was a rapist, did he have all the pornography? I can't decide. My feelings are that he probably would have raped whether he had pornography or not.
We have to decide where one's rights stop and start.
It's not what right-thinking people approve of or what right-thinking people will do or want to do. It's what the community's standards of tolerance are.
We're talking about censorship with the Freedom Party and what censorship could mean to you and me, all citizens in Canada. And I'd like your comments on this, Marc.
Well, I guess and this will come up a lot when I speak about political issues, is that people's lack of consistency, in a more mean-spirited frame of mind, I might say they were hypocritical. But one of the things that people misunderstand is that somehow censorship only has to do with sexually explicit material, like dirty magazines. And yet I meet people, when metric was being imposed on this country, who are dead against metrification, forced metrification, that's the important word, forced metrification. And that to me is a very serious form of censorship. When people tell you, as George Orwell was astute enough to note, when people tell you what language to use, they're trying to control your choices, trying to limit the sphere of ideas in which you can discuss. And yet those same people who are very much against imposed French language laws or metrification don't see anything wrong with having magazines with nude women banned. Or feminists who find nothing offensive, and rightly so, perhaps, about lesbian poetry, are all in the forefront of having sexually explicit magazines for men banned, even though it's merely just another avenue of sexuality. Is our inability to appreciate lifestyles of other people, our intolerance, that is the biggest threat to this country today, and that manifests itself in censorship. Because we want what we like protected, but we are intolerant of others, that's how censorship gets going. And of course, Freedom Party, perhaps even more valuable than the aspect of freedom itself, is the appreciation of tolerance. Tolerance, though we may not approve of their lifestyle, is an acknowledgement that they are entitled to find the path of happiness in their way that suits them and wouldn't necessarily suit us. And if we can walk away and say, live and let live, then you're on your way to becoming what I think is a very healthy human being.
There is a quote, and I forget who said it, somebody famous. I may not agree with what you say or stand for, but I'll fight to the death. Voltaire, thank you for your right to say it. And I agree with you entirely there.
There aren't many people left who will stand up for your right to say it, I'm afraid. And certainly to
well,
defend
there should
to the
be
death.
more.
No,
there should be more.
Well, I'm one of them, but anybody else out there who wants to defend to the death other people's right to live their life, so please contact me, because I need the help, because it's a tough job by yourself.
Thank you for that comment. You brought me to one other thing, which linked together in pornography. You mentioned the Retail Sales Act or something. This is to do with Sunday shopping. Now, originally, this act came from Britain as one of these antique Victorian things called the Lord's Day Observance Act.
1906.
1906, fine, the same time as
with the staunch support of the Lord's Day Alliance.
Right. But then, I guess, Canada couldn't handle it, so they changed it into the Retail
Business, yeah.
Business.
Well, it's found unconstitutional.
But it is still, basically, a religious form of repression, is it not?
Oh, that's right, and religious views are completely compatible in any society when you ask your members. If they were to ask if a church were to say, you know, I believe anybody who's a member of this church should not shop on Sunday, should not open their store on Sunday, and of course their members naturally believe this and made a commitment to that, that's very proper and fine. But when a general religious belief gets instituted in law, then it's very wrong, and it's very evil. And it's an irony that perhaps some churches should be associated with what I regard as a very un-Christian attitude. After all, Christ did not condemn people for operating a business on the Sabbath, only in the temple on the Sabbath. And there's no precedent to punish people for operating or serving. After all, we are serving others by operating a business on the Sabbath. We are not providing a disservice, but in fact a service. So we're offering to our fellow men something that they desire. And again, free will was never condemned by Christ or by God in any writings, and yet it's churches that are very much against free will and operating a business on the Sabbath.
Okay. With that remark, we'll go to a clip of some of the work that the Freedom Party, and yourself particularly, have done on the issue of pornography.
This Freedom Party rally coincides with an anniversary. 101 years ago, the first Sunday closing laws were passed. And co-founder Marc Emery sees Sunday shopping as the battle between freedom and state control. So this party favors freedom of choice.
Unlike Mr. Peterson's government, who's kind of flip-flopped and kind of backed out of the issue, we think it should be left up to the individual themselves, and certainly not be monitored by the provincial government or the city government.
The party president has reason to be encouraged. The number of new members continues to grow.
Definitely the money's been coming in. A lot of our public advocacy programs have been showing up, full-page advertising in newspapers, particularly things like the major issues that have brought us into the forefront. I mean, on Sunday shopping and things like taxes, Freedom Party stands alone in its position against all the other parties.
By taking stands the mainstream parties don't, the Freedom Party hopes to increase its vote. But there are few illusions of any by-election win. The work now is more a case of preparing and building for the future.
Back again, and linking pornography, censorship, and Sunday shopping. They all seem to wind up, basically, with one group of people, often a minority, but a vocal minority, telling everybody else what they can do and when they can do it, how they should dress, or how they should read, or how they should view a film or a video, and what they should teach their children, all of which appalls me, and I gather it does also the Freedom Party. So perhaps you could talk a little bit more, Murray, about how you see the Freedom Party trying to reach out for people and look for your individuals. I guess that's what you're looking for, is individuals more than a mass power behind you.
In fact, my main objection to Sunday shopping is the fact that it limits the peaceable activity of citizens, and that is something that no government should ever do. We limit the activities of citizens who want to commit murder, rob us, assault us, punch us out. And we're putting the merchant who wants to open on Sunday in the same context as those people.
And with
imagine the chaos that would result if you had laws for murder that only were in effect 6 days a week, and that maybe on Sunday they could go out and murder anyone they wanted. Laws have to apply equally to all. That's one of the great common law traditions we've inherited from ancient Greece. You can't have exceptions. You can't have some people who can open on Sunday and some who can't. You can't have so many square feet of the store allowing a man to stay open and the other having to stay closed. It's ludicrous. It's a legislative pizza. The whole act. It's senseless.
Can I ask you about that? Is it true, because I haven't encountered this, is it true that you can open your store on a Sunday if you rope off certain parts of it and only have...
I think they did away with that, didn't they?
No. Yeah, and
so
if you were to
they changed the
Herbie's Drug Mart, for example, as long as they partition off the aspects of the store not related to actual sales of pharmaceuticals, are permitted to open up, or if they have fewer than 4 employees. In my case, the law was changed after I raised a proper ruckus about the law. But I'm one of the few bookshops that can open, because the rest of them are slightly larger than I am, and therefore they're in a size restriction and they can't operate.
That is just senseless. It doesn't make any sense at all.
And this is all based on a 100-year-old religious act?
Well,
or loosely based?
See, prejudices run deep in our society. One of the hopes for Canada is that we have a cosmopolitan society made up of hundreds of religions, hundreds of races, and ultimately I think people will look and say there's no point in just being a hyphenated Canadian anymore. We have to be a brotherhood of Canadians. And therefore we're just going to have to accept that the reason we're all here is we sought refuge from the prejudices of the rest of the world, whether it was religious persecution, whether it was economic persecution, whether it was racial persecution or communist persecution. We all came to Canada, and our forefathers did, for a reason, to escape intolerance and tyranny. And that we should, of all things, institute that in our laws in this country is a sick irony that this is the country that should cherish differences, not annihilate them. It should be a country that relishes the difference. And we do in our restaurants. When it comes to things that don't question our opinions, we accept that. But unfortunately, we've got to accept it when it comes to the area of people's lifestyles, people's opinions, people's color. And that's a great vision I have for Canada, that one day we will.
Yeah, it still seems that compared to our neighbors on the south, we do have a great deal of repressive small laws. I'm not talking about big laws, about real bad people, but little bylaws, petty laws, like restrictions. And I guess this is something that the Freedom Party would like to do away with. The less government, better government.
Well, and that's going to happen in the long run. What we, of course, Freedom Party's initial goal is that we have to actually talk to people like this and ask them to listen. Do you really feel that insecure that you want to have your neighbor intimidated by laws? Do you really are you really worried that your neighbor might be smoking marijuana? Is it really worth bringing in a tyrannical government apparatus just so you can feel secure that your neighbors aren't doing anything that personally offends you? And I think if we really start looking at ourselves and saying, no, I enjoy being a free man or woman in a country that's free, and I think these restrictions are wrong. When people start feeling that way about themselves, then Freedom Party will become a more and more credible alternative to them. And so it's a matter of education first. People have to feel good about themselves before they're going to vote for Freedom Party. I think people who are frightened of freedom, and a lot of people are frightened of freedom, and frightened of responsibility, if they're frightened about the obligations of being a free man, and there are many obligations of being a free man or woman, then we're not going to get their vote and their support. But I think as we, and I have great hope for this country, as we develop a healthier, more accepting society, Freedom Party will come around, and we're going to be here for the long run, so I look forward to it.
Okay. Flipping the channels a little bit, because we only got a couple of minutes left, the Freedom Party is in favor of free trade, but I've heard a lot of people worry about the fact that the United States will just take our resources, our water, our timber, our natural resources, and everybody's going to lose. Now, can we have it briefly?
Our natural resources are of no use when they're in the ground. They don't have any value. Oil has no value when it's half a mile down. Same thing with gold ore. None of these resources. Well, a tree has no value for someone who wants to build a house unless it's cut. So the point is, these resources are not the things themselves, but the resources are the application of human energy to convert those raw resources into something that'll satisfy a human need.
Okay.
And they're going to have to pay us for that.
But we could possibly be wrecking the land while we're doing this.
Well, that's because the land always resides in the hands of the government. The government has political interests at their, not environmental interests. Or, like, one thing I've always known is garbage doesn't accumulate in people's front yards or backyards, only on government property.
Okay.
But
I'm going to have to wrap this up right now.
One more thing, no small country ever suffered from free trade. There's no historical evidence to it.
Thank you for that, Mark. And we're wrapping up now. Stay tuned if you can, because I have an animal trainer coming on, the Greenpeace, and a variety of other interesting guests and interesting topics. And thank you for watching tonight, Aware Words. Good night. Existence is beyond the power of words to define. Terms may be used, but none of them are absolute. In the beginning of heaven and earth, there were no words. Words came out of the womb of matter. And whether a man dispassionately sees to the core of life, or passionately sees the surface, the core and the surface are essentially the same. Words making them seem different, only to express appearance. If name be needed, wonder names them both. From wonder into wonder, existence opens.